Well, hey, Brookwood, so grateful you're on this journey with us as we are diving into this series, Faithful, which, as you know, is a look at the life of this king in the Bible named Josiah. Josiah was referred to as one of the most faithful kings. In fact, it says about Josiah that there was no king like him, and there was no king, or there will never be a king after him. And so we were just looking at the principles of his life and how he stewarded the mantle, the leadership, the faith that was deposited in him, and how he was faithful. And so one of the things I want you to know right off the bat as we talk on this Josiah series on faithful is that one of the things we find is that he went all in. And what I want you to know about faith is this. There are two ways we run our Christian race. One is in community. When God created the world, Adam was there and he was by himself. And many of you, if you've been in church, you know this part where God says it's not good for man to be alone. And so one of the ways we run our Christian race is we run it in community. And one of the things I find interesting is as we've just navigated all the effects of this Hurricane Helene, I was reading about this, but do you know California redwood trees? Have you ever been to California and you've seen these redwood trees? They're monstrous trees. In fact, some are so big that you can actually drive a car through the base of one of these trees. That's how big they are. But what I found out is very few of these trees actually tip over because they have this underlying root system that interconnects them, that intertwines them, so that when the storms they face hit them, they're actually stronger together. And what I find is people who are not walking in community are the ones who are the quickest to fall off or to fall away from faith. The Bible refers to us as a sheep. And as we know, a lone sheep can get picked off by a wolf. Those in communities are often protected. So when we talk about the Christian life, one thing you have to understand is you have a call, I have a call to walk in community. And that's what this whole thing is about, walking in community. But I do want to say this. The other way you and I are supposed to live our Christian life isn't just in community. It's also a solo part of our race, or a part that we have to do by ourselves. And so one of the things we've talked about as we go all in is no one in community can seek God for you. You need a community of people that can hold your arms up in difficult seasons, come alongside of you, celebrate victories, grieve the hardships, but no one in your community. Your parents can't do this for you. Your spouse can't do this for you. Your friends can't do this for you. They cannot seek God for you. And so Josiah, the Bible says, got to this point where after a while he began to seek God. And so I ask you this question, not how has your church attendance been, not even what your small group attendance has been, but how has your daily pursuit of God been? I remember a question I asked a professor one time when I was in Bible college. I asked him, how do you pray through certain things? And I asked him even this question, how do you know if you're going to marry the right person? Everyone talks about marrying the right person or meeting the right person. And I remember going into his office one day and asking the question, like, how do you know if the person's the right person? And his answer sort of surprised me because he looked at me and he said, I'm convinced the questions you're asking are good questions, but they're not the right questions. I'm convinced if you ask this one question, do you love God more today than you did yesterday? Then all those other things tend to fall in place. What he was really saying is, are you seeking God daily? Are you falling more in love with God daily? And maybe even as you think about this, do some surveillance in your life. Do you feel like you love God more this month than you did last month? Do you feel like you love God more this time than you did last year? Because what we are called to do, and no one can do this for us, is you are called to daily seek God. In fact, I love what the scriptures say. It says God's mercies are new each day. What that means is yesterday's mercies won't suffice for today's problems. If you find yourself famished, or if you find yourself apathetic, or you find yourself discouraged, I can almost assure you that part of that is you have not feasted on the presence of God that day. That's why when Jesus is teaching the disciples to pray, he tells them, give them this day your daily bread, which means daily we got to seek God. So how has your pursuit of God been in this season? How is your daily pursuit of God? Maybe discuss what that looks like. One of the things I think is so important is to find a time, a place, and a plan. You know, I remember for years I thought I was going to go to the gym, but when you go to the gym, you can actually get overwhelmed because if you don't know what you're doing once you get to the gym, you can see all these machines and all these things and you don't know where to begin. And spiritual formation is a lot like that. I encourage you, find a time. Don't just think, I'm going to spend time with God tomorrow. Put a time on your calendar and be faithful like you would a meeting with someone else, a friend, a coworker. Have a meeting time with God. Be unapologetic about finding a time. But also, make sure you find a place. There was a outdoor beach chair that I sat in for years when I was learning to walk with God. That chair really formed so much of my identity. It's the place I learned to hear from God. It's the place I learned to spend time with God. But that chair, every time I saw it, and every time I see it to this day, is still one of the most formative things in my life. Do you have a chair that when you see it, encourages you or draws you closer to God? Find a place that you can meet, and then find a plan. Find a Bible study. We have these devotionals that you can read. One simple thing is if you don't have a plan, just read the devotional and then read the verse or the chapter from the verse that you read that morning. But find a plan to do. But make sure you seek God daily. No one in community can do that for you. You have to do that. Communities are so important, and you cannot live the Christian race alone, but you also can't have a community seek God for you. The second thing a community cannot do for you is a community cannot break cycles of sin that you are navigating through. In fact, I mentioned this on Sunday, but I want to read this verse to you one more time from Josiah, or from 2 Kings rather, about Josiah. 2 Kings 23:12 says this: Josiah tore down the altars that the kings of Judah had built on the palace roof above the upper room of Ahaz. The king destroyed the altars that Manasseh, this is his grandfather, had built in the two courtyards of the Lord's temple. But notice this: he smashed them to bits and scattered the pieces in the Kidron Valley. The king also desecrated the pagan shrines east of Jerusalem to the south of the Mount of Corruption, where King Solomon of Israel had built shrines. So, two things I want to highlight about this verse. Number one, did you notice that he tore down the altar? But he didn't just tear down the altars, he desecrated them. He grinded them down, the Bible says. And what's the point that I'm trying to make? When you are committed to following God, you have to go to war with sin in your life. You can't negotiate, you can't be apathetic. I think this verse is maybe one of the verses that could be the most prophetic verse for some people today, because if you don't go to war with that anger, if you don't go to war with that lust, if you don't go to war with that bitterness, if you don't go to war with that sin in your life, that thing will keep growing and it will keep coming back. You have to get to the root of that. And for years, I was apathetic or just sort of nonchalant in my approach of killing sin. But here's what Josiah did that no one else did. He desecrated. It was his way of saying, there is no turning back. I am all in for the things of God. Can I ask you this? If you're facing some situation in your life, are you fully committed in that situation to honor God? Because sometimes if you're anything like me, what I know is I'm double-minded. Yes, God, I want you, but I also want this. The only way you can desecrate, get rid of something, go to war with something is if you've made up your mind to be all in with Jesus. If you've made up your mind that he will be the center of everything. Josiah did that, and the people of God began to flourish. When you go to war with your sin, what will happen is your heart will begin to grow in new and fresh ways. I'm reminded of what a pastor told me that really shaped the way I saw this. But for years, I saw sin as just something that we should just sort of, it's something we just want to sort of deal with and navigate. But he said this to me about sin. He said, do you realize your purity, or from your purity, is actually where your power arises? And for years, I never really understood the heart of being pure. But what he was basically telling me this is if you want a spiritual power, it comes from your purity. And the only way to have a purity is by going to war with the sin in your life. And so my ability to go to war with sin is what affects my ability to see God. I can promise you this, if you see God, if you hear God, it's because you're all in and committed to him in some area of your life. And so I ask you this question: have you really gone to war with the sin in your life? Are you negotiating? Are you letting those things live? Are you sort of dealing with it partially? If you are, can I just encourage you, the Bible's very clear. To follow Jesus means to die to yourself. There are no terms in surrender. It's complete and utter surrender to God in that particular area. No one can break the cycles of sin for you. No one can seek God. But what I find often with Christians is we tend to pick one or the other. And so when we think of our pursuit with God, we tend to think of maybe more of an offensive approach where we're seeking God, but we're not thinking about the sin in our life. Or I'll talk to people and they're like, yeah, I'm dealing with these sins, but they're sort of apathetic in their pursuit of God. For you to be all in means you need both. You need an offense where you are seeking God daily, where his mercies are new each and every day, where like Josiah, you are seeking him and you're putting him first in your calendar, you're meeting with him, you're being faithful. But in addition to that, you also have to have a defensive strategy. You cannot negotiate and keep sin in your life. You've got to go to war with those things. So where in your life might you need to seek God, or where might you need to let something go? Christian faith, being all in, is about an offense and a defense. And I'm praying that during this sermon series, as you're faithful, God will bless you as you seek him and as you seek to go to war with the things in your life.